자. 자. Hi, this is Junsa Park, and I'm going to explain those people about the cellular respiration. 웃지 말라고. So, do you guys know why people eat food every day?
Yes.
Why?
Because we need energy.
Like what you said, yeah, people eat food to make energy with it. So the cellular respiration is the process of making the food that we eat to the energy that we use to work or like body to function. So basic formula for this cellular respiration is this, which is C6H12O6 plus 6O2 into the 6CO2 plus 6H2O and ATP. So to make this simple, it's making the glucose, which is the simple form of the food we eat, and the O2, the oxygen that we breathe in. And with the process called cellular respiration, we change into the CO2, carbon dioxide, which we breathe out, and the H2O, water, and the ATP, which is energy. Just to be simple. So the first step is called the glycolysis. It happens inside of the cell, which is the space called the cytosol. So in this process, the glucose which we get from the broken down form of the food gets converted into the molecule called pyruvate. So it gets split into these two pyruvates. And in this process, some of the ATP, which is energy, is released, and also some of the electron is released also. These electrons get attached to the molecule called NAD plus, which is basically molecule that carries electron through this whole process. And as the electron meets with this NAD plus, it gets converted into the NADH. So you can think like NAD plus is the empty carrier, and when it carries the electrons in it, it changes to NADH. So it goes to the next process, which is called the pyruvate oxidation. And for this, it happens in the organelle called the mitochondria. Do you guys know? Yeah. So in the mitochondria, there's two membranes in it. So because there's two membranes, there is also the two spaces, which is the inner space called mitochondrial matrix, and the space between these two membranes, which is intermembrane space. So this pyruvate oxidation occurs inside of the mitochondrial matrix, the inner space. And what happens here is the pyruvates that were split, that were made in the glycolysis, gets converted into the molecule called acetyl-CoA. Okay. And this will be used in the next step. And also, like this glycolysis, in this process, some of the NAD plus consumes the electrons that are released from the process and makes NADH. And also it releases CO2, which we will eventually breathe out. And next process is called the citric acid cycle, or the Krebs cycle. And this has some complex steps in it, but to make this simple, we use the acetyl-CoA is made in the pyruvate oxidation, and we produce two ATP, CO2, NADH, and FDH2. And again, what was NADH?
When NAD plus carries the electron.
Yes, right. Yeah. And FADH2 is same. Its original form is called FAD. But when it carries electrons in it, it converts to NADH2. Okay. So basically, in this process, like for one acetyl-CoA, it produces one ATP, two CO2, three NADH, and one FADH2. But because there are two acetyl-CoA, we have to double it. So there's 2 ATP, 4 CO2, 6 NADH, and 2 FADH2. And again, the CO2 is released in our body. From glycolysis to citric acid cycle, it is the process of making the electron carriers along with little amount of ATP. And the fourth step is the most important part because in this process, most of the ATP is produced. So what happens here is all the electron carriers that are made from these three steps goes close to the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Okay, and this step is called oxidative phosphorylation. So in this inner membrane, there are some protein pumps that are embedded on the membrane, and what happens here is these electron carriers, NADH and FDH2, they release electrons into this protein. So because they release electrons again, it converts back to the NAD plus and FAD. Okay, and what this electron do is it gets passed to another electron that is beside it, and gets passed and goes until the end of the last protein. And as the electron gets passed, it actually activates this protein to work. It pumps out the protons inside of the mitochondrial matrix. Okay. So as electron moves, the one hydrogen ions or protons gets pumped out to the intermembrane space, moves, the protons goes out, moves, and protons goes out, and on and on and on. And after this process, the electron should go somewhere. It can't just stay in the protein or just move to other places. So here's where the oxygen comes in. So electron gets attached to this O2, and O2 also accepts some of the hydrogen ions in the mitochondrial matrix and makes water. And that's how water is made from this process. And this is the only reason why the oxygen is used in this process, and this is only reason why people breathe in the air, just to release this electron. Okay. So when you see here, because protein membrane pumped out a lot of hydrogen ions, there are many hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space, whereas the matrix doesn't have a lot of electrons. If there's one high concentration, one part with high concentration and low concentration, the high concentration moves to the low concentration. Okay. So because there are higher concentration in the intermembrane space with the more protons, it tries to move into the mitochondrial matrix where there's low concentration. Okay. But because they are polar, which means they are hydrophilic, they can't just move into the intermembrane space because they are too big to just penetrate through. So they goes into the enzyme called ATP synthase. So they goes into the ATP synthase just like that. And what happens here is, as they go through the ATP synthase, it generates some energy and makes this move. How ATP is made is by adding the molecule called ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, which is here. So di means 2, so there is some molecule called adenosine and diphosphate, so there's 2 phosphates in it. Okay. And when it adds one more phosphate, it becomes adenosine triphosphate, which is ATP. So by adding adenosine diphosphate to other phosphate, it makes triphosphate. Can you explain it? Can you tell what the parts that you don't understand?
What do electrons do when in this?
I said the electrons moves through the protein, right? As it moves, it provides some energy to this protein pumps to move. And what this protein pumps do when it gets activated, it pumps out the hydrogen ions. And when these hydrogen ions are more here than here, it tries tries to go into this place again to like balance the concentration of the hydrogen ion. You get it?
Yeah.
As they go in by this ATP synthase, there's some ADP here and the phosphate here, and by adding it, it makes ATP. Yes, ADP with 2 phosphate as 1, and it becomes ATP with 3 phosphate. Okay, and that's how the energy is made. And the reason why this process is important is because it provides most ATP in it. So when you see the glycolysis, it makes only 2 ATP. Pyruvate oxidation, it doesn't make any ATP. Citric acid cycle, it makes 2, but in this cycle, in this process, it makes about like 32 to 34 ATP. So when one glucose goes through cellular respiration, it provides at least like about 36 to 38 ATP. Yeah, and that's how the glucose changes to energy, and that's it.